Okay, that's a picture from 4 years ago, Hakone. My wife and I were having a stroll there on an old road directly after a rainfall, and it was very pleasant except for the fact that we couldn't get anywhere because my wife was always nearly falling and slipping on those stones. And eventually she solved the problem by taking off her shoes. And that really sort of got us then to our target in the end. But it was a little bit restricting in other senses. Okay, so if we translate that to what I want to talk about is when we have complex layouts, and what I'm going to talk about in terms of complex is something like multi-columns. That's what I'm sort of mainly concentrating on here. My claim is that tech is actually not up to the task. And that's what I try to talk. Oops, is this still going on? No. Hi? Yeah. Good. Unless we restrict ourselves, like taking off the shoes and getting a limited environment. So, maybe something else is needed. Some people may know this from San Francisco. If not, we can't do it. So, let's move on. What is being asked by people over the years? On tech, reward, multiple columns, text balancing. It's going away again. So, maybe I need a different mic. Well, no, it's not good. What we can do, like, I don't know. It's late in the day.
The batteries.
Okay, never mind. If that's okay, we'll manage. Float positioning at the same time, grid typesetting, and we have a lot more things that people ask for if it comes to complex layout. And if we look at this, several of them are already conflicting goals. So if you vary the number of columns on a page, then we have to ask ourselves, what do we do with footnotes? That's something I come to later. We have to ask ourselves what is going to happen to floats, because as we know, those things are basically fixed images in terms of how tech is seeing those kind of things. And if you want to have something in a column, and the column size changes, then you have a little bit of a problem there. Question on balancing. You want balancing, but people sometimes, but people also want to have explicit column breaks to a certain extent. The change, what is this going to be? But the change of typesetting based on columns. Sorry, getting lost. Let's leave this one out. Automatic float placement. As I said earlier, people want to have floats inside their columns. We want to have relationship maintained, and we want to produce pleasing compact output. And on grid typesetting, we want to have in certain layouts grid typesetting, but we also have a lot of elements, especially if you think about must typesetting, but also other elements in typical tech documents that have unknown heights. And that is obviously a problem if you do grid typesetting. And most people want to do this kind of thing fully automatically. And they want to have exceptions, but they want those exceptions being guessed. So it's nothing, you try to get those kind of things there. And several of them, as we go through it, actually don't fit nicely together. Some history. A bunch of things, and I'm talking here about LaTeX. Maybe Hans wants to talk about the context side of the house. Starting '82 was a tech book, There is actually a page by Don talking about balancing. I produce multi-call, sometimes 88, and then, so the list goes on. They all have problems. Tech book solution is very specific for one use case. And that's why it is 1 page long in terms of implementation. It can do the index of the tech book. Multi-call as a product has multiple columns, but there are, as everybody reminds people on the internet once and again and again and again, oh sorry, you can't have floats on mostly. And footnotes are always full page wide. It's not. So there are bad restrictions in that sense. Balancing by Patrick is actually a manual solution. You have to enter the balancing command in the right place, and if you change the text, you have to replace it. There is in RefTech the solution by Arthur, which is 2-column doing automatic layout, but they can lose data, which is also something where you have to do manual sort of checking. Not often, but it can happen. Then around 2000, I produced the experimental version of a new output routine for the never-ending story of LaTeX, which can do all these kind of nice things like general float handling, balancing, grids, with a small caveat, it is not in a production version still. So that's not a solution either in a full generality. Then there's FlowFram, which is a very interesting one, but it is doing something else. It's actually sort of pre-defining how your pages are looking like, which is a different approach. Is if you want to do basically designing outside of tech. And then there's Boris fixes to my multi-call, which is doing a few sort of corrections and implementations improvements, but it is also not solving the major limitations. But on the whole, that's all. And this is covering 30 years, roughly. And so the question is, why are there so few attempts and why none of them actually succeeded? And I think the answer is this one, the tech model. And small little quote as a sort of understanding why the tech model is like the tech model. I just came across a web seminar by Don Knuth from '81, and in there he was making this interesting statement. Please use 4 or 5 page long documents in the exercise, because we can't actually afford to have 100 people doing 40 page documents through the day. So that was the kind of power Stanford had when he was implementing tech. In other words, that's a real serious restriction on how much you want to have the program doing in terms of computation. And I think the model is to some extent the result of that, and we are still working with this model which was based on that kind of restricted environment. So what's the model looking like? Basically, the approach is single column, left to right typesetting, do display mathematics with baselines not sort of in grid levels like normal baseline on text, and it is offering paragraph optimization. That's sort of the main features of what is the output of the model without going into the technique what the model actually does. The typesetting and the processing is unidirectional. So you start from building paragraphs, then they are fixed units, you make columns, sort of a galley out of it, which becomes a fixed thing, and the only thing you do is you cut it in pages. And you have some limited multi-level stream functionality for footnotes and floats, but it's, as I said, limited. And I think this is another one which is important. The paragraph shape is based on the paragraph lines. It is not based on the vertical spacing. So it goes awfully wrong if you have something which is not regular in the paragraph in terms of height. So for example, as far as paragraph shapes are concerned, TUG is taking the approach that each display math is 3 lines long. So if you build a shape, then 3 lines of your special shape is being taken by a display, which may or may not be right. So, in other words, that will not actually work in many cases, and you have to do it by trial and error if you have a special shape. Okay, so the consequences of this model is that this paragraph to galley to page is freezing your horizontal width. And by freezing means you have issues with reprocessing. You can't actually change the widths on the fly if outside triggers like a page break happen. And that's one thing that is a consequence. I also talked about the paragraph shapes, which go wrong if you have unusual objects in your paragraph. There is no concept for grids. I mean, technically speaking, as Hans said earlier, you can nearly do everything in TUG in some form or the other, but there's no real underlying support. In fact, the glue concept that TUG has as a major part of its model is the opposite. I mean, it is just anti-grid, if you like. And as I said earlier, if you go for different streams of data, the relationship is only maintained very rudimentary. You lose things if you come to output routines and you want to go back. Those kind of things will all need to be managed differently. It's not inherent in the system. So far for the TUG model. A little bit more detail on the user wish list. This is all mostly coming from Stack Exchange, the fairly popular question answer site these days, and I was looking around to sort of what are people asking for these days, plus things that I know from the last 20 years basically. So things like, how do I fill the first column first rather than do balancing? Well, how do I avoid stretching the last column, which is a fairly good thing to have in certain cases? How do I prevent balancing of short texts? So the answer is the first 2 are easy, and they're actually working in LaTeX fairly well. So multicol, for example, can not balance. Wasn't there in the first day, but it came very, very, very soon. Same with logic to decide whether the last column is going to be stretched out or not. The third question is already tricky. What is the good option to deal with small amounts of text if you have multiple columns that you want to balance? Here's an example. And it can get worse if you end up with just 1 line. This is 2 lines of text. And below it's it's still 3 columns, but only the first 2 are filled. So the question is, what is better? In terms of readability, often it's the second case. Especially if you think about it, you end up with just a single line in 3 columns. It looks rather awful. If you have these spaces, then it is looking like a single line. So right now we have in LaTeX something like manual solution for those cases, but it actually is not easily, or it is not automated in a full sense. Floats. Can I have my floats automatically placed? Can I have floats span several columns? Why are full floats always placed on the next page, not on the current one? Again, it's kind of a mixture thing. The first one is, can you have it automatically placed? No, you can't. basically if you come around to balance, then every balancing is throwing off your calculations. That's a technical one. I'll go into a little bit detail later on. You could do something about it, but right now that's not really done in LaTeX properly. Can you have multiple columns spanned? Again, from what we have in LaTeX, no. But technically speaking, it's not actually that simple if you restrict yourself. Restricting means balancing is a little bit of an issue that you have to sort of restrict then, and if it's not done automatically, then it's going to be easy. So if you go like a magazine approach, and you say, I would like to see this float on page 5, first 2 columns, that could be fairly simply implemented. Actually, it is implemented. There exists a package to extend multicolor for this one. And then the last one, that's again showing sort of the limitations we had when TEC was built and when LaTeX 2.9 and LaTeX 2E was sort of developed. Basically, those spanning floats are not on the same page because it means backtracking if the first column is already filled. And that is costly, and back then it wasn't done. It could be implemented. It's actually not that difficult to extend the current LaTeX output regime to support this these days, but the system is not doing this. Small side note, coming to this question about automatically placing floats. There is a small problem in numbers. If you have a number of areas where you can place floats, and if you think about 3-column documents, and you have floats spanning all 3 columns, floats spanning potentially 2 columns, floats are inside the 3 columns. And this on top and on bottom, you end up in a simple way already with 12 areas that you could place floats into. If you would then also allow something like floats coming in the middle of the document somewhere, sort of splitting the columns, it would even get bigger in terms of those. So you have a number of areas, that's the A, and if you have a number of floats that it should be placed on the current page, then you get very easily into high numbers of potential solutions that you need to evaluate. And that is going to be very, very high. The numbers here are sort of the more intelligent reduction where you say, okay, floats have an order, and if I place something in the third area, I can't place a later float earlier. Then the numbers obviously reduce. But still, if you have 8 floats waiting on a 3-column page, and you have 125,000 possibilities to look at in one way or the other. And if you want to look at a double spread, so in other words, both pages can receive floats because you can see them on both pages. So this kind of approach where the float can come earlier as long as it's still visible. Then you end up with 24 areas on a 3-column, and you see the numbers. 10 million or something if you have 10 floats waiting. And that, even with today's machines, is taking you some time, even if it's just a simple check to say, oh no, don't need this solution. So this is an area where local optimization is already, with the current approaches, getting us to a limit. And global optimization, where you think about several pages, is getting us even further. So basically, this is an unsolved problem outside of tech, how to deal with those kind of things. But this is one of the reasons why the approach is currently sort of not getting very far. Okay, so much for floats. Columns, also a very interesting thing if what you see what people are asking for. Can I have columns of different widths? Clearly an interesting and important question. The answer, unfortunately, is no. Well, it is yes, depending on how much you restrict yourself, but in a general sense, it's no, simply because of the tech model. because everything is already pre-compiled. Plus the fact that if you sort of redo things using paragraph shapes, you have the problem that it may not actually fit reality what you compute in the first go, so you have several trials. So the first one is no. The second one is again something on the same level. Can I have different number of columns per page? Because the page break is not a natural thing in your document. Unless you explicitly end something, then of course you have control and you can change the column. But if it just flows, you have the same problem coming from TUG. And the third one is, was asked, I found it very nice, can I have arbitrary shape columns? Yes, the answer was David Carlyle came up with this one. But it is not really general what he did. I mean, you can imagine what he did. So reiterating on the paragraph breaking, I mean, I think I said that. It's broken first, therefore we have the problem of reformatting, and reformatting in TUG is not really working. So consequences, we can do it at the macro level. So we capture the data and not actually formatting, but then we get into certain problems of needing to make sure that things are not done several times. If you do typesetting like counter increasing or things like that are actually throwing things off if you run actually the macro source. The shape requirements, I said that before, is a problem, and you have this problem. You then go trial and error. You say, okay, I need three lines of this width, and then the rest in different widths, and it turns out to be 4 because of some shape inside or something. So it's, well, technically it would be possible to get those kind of things, but again, mostly if you very carefully control what goes in, and not if you allow anything like LaTeX typically tries to do, is basically to be open to any kind of environment input, and not very specific reduction of input that is allowed. So, more columns. Can you skip to the next column if there are only a few lines left? Can I have fixed column text on top? Can I have variable content on top, which is a sort of a variation of that idea, like in continuation lines of an index? And can I have a table broken across several pages or columns, which is a bit of an interesting thing that a table goes through columns. But I mean, it seems to be that several people have that as a requirement. So here it looks a little bit better. These things can all be provided. Except for the last is not so easy. But the problem with the last is really we have the issue that again TUG is trying to process things first into a galley and then breaks up, and something like table processing needs to repeat table headers, and that means reprocessing part of the input, and that typically involves then something like changes to the output routines, and those need to all work nicely together. And right now in LaTeX we don't have a solution for this. I mean, not properly to have something like long table work with multi-column output and so on and so forth. Technically, it would be possible if you go very, very far in terms of coding in TUG. So. And then another one which I think is also very reasonable to ask for is to have the extra output coming out depending on which column you are. So something like marginal nodes. If you're in the first column, you want it in the left column, in the inner column, say typesetting left to right, and you want it in the outer margin if you're on the last column. I'm not so clear what you do in the middle ones, but yeah, I mean those kind of questions. I mean the second one is the same type. Somebody was asking, can I have my line numberings in something like a verbatim environment that automatically put line numbers to the code, switch from left number to right number if I go from first column to second column. Those kind of things. Pull out quotes. Answer here is yes, you can all this, and actually I've implemented a small extension to multi-core, which I may or may not actually add into it, or rather than as a separate package that offers you this kind of thing. The one problem with this kind of stuff is, of course, in current tech, you need to do multi-pass. Things are fast these days, but it still means you have several passes. And if you have a complex document, several passes can be really more than two, because things are settling slowly if it goes sort of ripples through the document, if your formatting changes, sort of positioning of certain things. If worst come to worst, is you can create what I call an impossible document. They're much easier than you can these days with a single column format. Impossible document means a document that always alternates between two or more states. As a simple example, when you want to do it in LaTeX, if you have a reference to your preface, and the preface is done in Roman numbers, the length of the page number is not linear. So if you go from page 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 to 8, it all gets bigger because of the VIII. And then on page 9 it suddenly gets shorter, and on page 10 it's just an X. So the length of the stuff is not linearly increasing, and that means you can alternate, if you're unlucky, between a reference talking back to page 9, which is long, moving the stuff, making the text bigger, then TUG decides to change the paragraph breaking, which moves the reference back. And so it just alternates between the two reference numbers. They're never correct. Those kind of things can happen nearly never in current LaTeX, other than this kind of example. But if you come to this more complex situation where you actually do a lot of reformatting depending on your visual output, like which column am I in, that can increase the situation. Okay, so rules, another one. Can you have rules colored? Can you have just a few rules? Very strange question, like between the fourth and the fifth. Because what I think people are thinking of often when they talk about multi-column, asking these kind of questions, they're thinking more about table, really, not about flow. But okay, those questions have been asked. I like embellishing the rules. And again, it's easy to do in theory. In practice, we currently don't have an interface on a user level. So the question is, what would be the right kind of user interface for those kind of things? How far do you want to get? And historically speaking, in contrast to context, LaTeX is a little bit sort of sloppy in terms of consistency on user interfaces. That is unfortunate by the many authors of the many packages. But yeah, something like that could be provided and maybe happening. Background and shades, same situation really. No difficulty to provide it. It isn't done, hasn't been done. So, and at the border question, we have a bunch of things like, why was there no one column multi-col that was solved by Boris? I never thought, why should I have a multi-column environment that consists of one column? But there are actually use cases for it, I learned. And another one is changing margins. And interdependencies, that really is not unsolvable. What makes it, even with fast machines these days, sort of getting us to the boundary of how long do you want to wait for processing, and do you really want to code these kind of things in TUG? Then something like algorithms outside, say in Lua or so, would be potentially the better solutions. And then there's the question of the huge search space that I was mentioning earlier. Right now, there is not any efficient algorithm to decide those kind of questions. And if you look through the literature outside,
of TUG in the research space of document engineering, there's not much there yet. So it's quite interesting. If you look at the papers, it goes plus, which is Michael Plus, the PhD student who did the paragraph breaking algorithm for Don's program. Then I think the next one may actually by me, and then there's 2 more coming up in 2007, basically on those kind of questions. So it's really not much happening yet. But in document engineering research circles, it is starting to get recognized as a problem that is actually a problem. I think in the middle of the 90s, people were thinking this is not a problem, it's just something you do solve. It's solved, it's just technical stuff. So and then there are soft problems. I mentioned a couple which are really related to bad user interfaces or missing. And obviously those could be solved by either different implementation or a general different format or an extended implementation. So give me a chance to tell me how much. 5? 7. Nice, good. Yeah, some things I wanted to sort of quickly jump through of interesting challenges in this space that either got solved or may not be solvable. So balancing considered harmful. Here's the rough algorithm of what I implemented as the multi-call solution. Find a good starting length, so you have a galley precompiled, and then you want to cut it to do balancing. You start with a certain value, you try cut everything to that height, then you have a bunch of decisions whether this actually works. So if the first column is shorter than the last one, then it's already a failure. If certain other things are happening, then it's also a failure. For example, if you have a user forced break, which never got used because it ends up in the last column, that you did something wrong, those kind of things. If you fail, you retry with a slightly larger column length and you do it again. If you succeed, there's some final thing to do to look at the last column and decide whether there's enough material to actually spread it out or not. So that's roughly what happens. What's the problem with this? Well, one problem I learned very late, I don't know how many years multi-call got used. You might end up overflowing your page because you start balancing because you think it's still on fitting the page, and you increase for some reason. You increase to a length that is larger than the remaining space on the page. That got recently solved, basically, after 15 or 20 years, I don't know, by introducing sort of some parameter how much you are allowed to overflow a page before you retry and say, okay, I need to do a normal page break, no balancing here. The second one is this one. Look at this. This is itemized five items. It ends up in 2 columns. So this is not looking nice, right? Because this last thing is spread out. So the algorithm goes and says, okay, go up. It doesn't go up properly. Why? Because in the last one, you have just a fill, basically, filling the column. The first one is actually a compressed column because it was the first solution that multi-call found that it actually could break the way that it is. First column is larger than the second column. It is not the natural baseline size. It goes by points, so it finds something which is, if there's some compressible space there, like between items, it goes like this. Problem is, there's no good solution for it. I mean, you can obviously go by baselines, like every 12 points, but then if your document is not very baseline-y, in terms of you have a lot of things like itemize, like sections which are not in normal baseline lengths, then this solution by going baseline wide jumps in balancing might be making things even worse. So the only solution would be to do a very complicated set of expectation of all the columns you generate, and then decide if this is a failure or not, depending on additional parameters. And even then, an automation may not work if you consider all possible columns, all possible user inputs. Only if you have a very defined document input structure, and you know that certain things are not going to happen, like you have a layout that is really baseline oriented, then you can easily get a solution. Otherwise you would do a lot and probably still fail in certain cases. Second one is a touch to typesetting from the right to the left, and I apologize for the quality of the scanned image, because I wasn't trying to join that with Beamer. That's an input, Persian data. I can't read it, but what should multi-goal do here? Basically nothing else than taking the first column and put it on the right, the second on next to it, and going the opposite direction, basically, when building the columns. Should be easy. That's the output, and it's wrong. Anybody sees it? What is wrong? That's the right one.
Yeah. The order of columns should be also.
No, the order, I corrected. The order is correct. The order jumped. This is actually the first column. Text goes from here, 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 here. So what is wrong is that the table of contents has suddenly the second section before the first. And why is that the case? Because TUG is still reading the DVI file or whatever from here. So this is now my first column as far as TUG is concerned, even if my text is here, the first column. So what I did wrong, and I wasn't the only one to implement that bloody incorrectly, I was just sort of reversing the column when I placed them, but it didn't take into account that TUG has no idea of that thing that I'm typesetting this direction, a normal TUG. And so I actually have to make sure that as far as TUG boxes are concerned, this is really the left column still. Even if it, so I move the first column to the right and then move backwards, so that as far as TUG is concerned, it's looking like this is the first column in the DVI file. So this is getting us, you see it jumps up there in there, those two things jump between the two implementations.
The center column's too short.
Yeah, but this is the way the Persian text does it. It is not me, not column, not LaTeX in that sense. It's the style of BDTech, whatever. Okay, so this is something to learn, that there are limitations in the way the engine actually thinks about right to left, or the standard engine with ETEC, and also I think not just ETEC, it's happened in other engines as well. So the second one is space and penalty. That was a nice one. This is really wrong. Look at this is the output. You see an issue? No? Well, same text on both sides, different positioning. And this puzzled me a little bit when I saw that. The reason is the way TUG optimized his paragraph baseline skip thing and breadth depth and those kind of things. There's a limitation in the model. You have here glue that is a penalty, then comes glue, this glue is cancelled, so this is actually 0, then comes another penalty, another glue, and so on and so forth. And if that is happening between the two itemized commands, if the break is taken here, you end up with a 0 glue at the bottom in the first column. And that means you are not at the baseline, because 0 glue at the bottom means the baseline is at the bottom of the column. So the breadth depth is basically gone as far as positioning is concerned. And yeah, you can solve that, and I fixed that in Multical, but again, that's a bug that was in there for ages until somebody came up with this strange example saying exactly the same text. So, summary. Coming back to the first picture, if you take off shoes, in other words, we restrict input and what we try to achieve with what method, we can get a very far with tech, obviously. Second one is automatic float placement, actually not resolved. It's a research area which hasn't got enough attention if you want to do complex layout. It is just, there are not really good solutions for it, none, or any. It's not an engine question. Then, what I was talking about several times, the paragraph shape model is defective. And this is really an issue with tech and any of its successors, extensions, LuaTech, whatever. It should not work on lines to specify a shape of a paragraph. It should work on a way to specify the shape according to the space, and then the algorithm should take into account whatever comes out of the line breaking to fit that. That's not solved, and I think that is an engine question that actually should get attention, should get a different implementation. Because, I mean, trial and error there is possible, but really not what you want. And the other thing, sort of briefly touched on this, the multi-directional typesetting may need a better model. I mean, we know that Don Knuth and, what was it, Pierre Mackay's implementation of TUG, what was it called? Anyway, the stuff that is in eTech these days is actually not proper solution, but it goes further because I think the Omega model is also defective to some extent, and that is basically what ended up in LuaTech in some way or shape through Aleph. So I'm interested to hear John speak about his new ideas on doing direction typesetting on Saturday, maybe?
Yeah.
And that's it. So is this waiting necessary? Bing bing. Now I have to. Thank you. And I was waiting for this. I think not. This is from Takayama also. I found this beautiful. We can help it along by doing a little bit of. And with that, I thank you.